We begin this morning with the war in Ukraine and the capital, Kyiv, which is once again coming under attack. 2 cruise missiles rocked the city last night. Local officials say 1 person was killed, 10 others were injured. The attack happened during a visit to the capital by UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, and it prompted fierce condemnation in Ukraine. President Zelensky accused Russia of trying to humiliate the UN. Meanwhile, the Biden administration is calling for more aid for Ukraine. The president is asking Congress to approve a $33 billion aid package. He called it a small price to pay for Ukraine's freedom.
We're not attacking Russia. We're helping Ukraine defend itself against Russian aggression. And just as Putin chose to launch this brutal invasion, he could make the choice to end this brutal invasion. Russia is the aggressor. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. Russia is the aggressor, and the world must and will hold Russia accountable. And as long as the assaults and atrocities continue, we're going to continue to supply military assistance.
NBC News global correspondent Raf Sanchez is in Lviv, Ukraine, and NBC News correspondent Josh Letterman is covering the latest developments out of the White House. Raf, let's start with you in that attack on Kyiv yesterday. Those 2 cruise missiles hit just as the UN Secretary General was visiting the Ukrainian capital. What more do we know about this attack? And also, what came out of that meeting between the UN chief and Zelensky?
Joe, President Zelensky was very clear. He sees this as an attempt by the Kremlin to send a message to humiliate the Secretary General of the United Nations and basically say to the international community, stay out of this. Don't interfere in our invasion in Ukraine. Now, as you said, 2 residential buildings were hit, 1 person killed, 10 injured. And this strike coming just an hour or so after the Secretary General emerged from that meeting with President Zelensky at the presidential compounds. Earlier in the day, the Secretary General had been walking around the suburb of Borodyanka. That is one of those Kyiv suburbs that, along with Bucha, whose name will be etched in infamy as a place where Russian forces appear to have carried out mass war crimes. I want you to take a listen to just a little bit of what the Secretary General had to say about that.
Ukraine is an epicenter of unbearable heartache and pain. I witnessed that very vividly today around Kyiv. The senseless loss of life, the massive destruction, the unacceptable violations of human rights and the laws of war.
Let me be very clear. The Security Council failed to do everything in its power to prevent and end this war. And this is a source of great disappointment, frustration, and anger.
Now, Joe, these strikes a reminder that while the fighting on the ground is focused on the east, Vladimir Putin's missiles are able to hit every corner of this country, from Kyiv here in Lviv down to Odessa in the south, and they are striking everywhere they can. Joe?
So, Josh, let's talk about the American response. Yesterday, President Biden asked Congress to greenlight this huge $33 billion aid package for Ukraine. What's included in that, and does it look like lawmakers will approve it?
Yeah, that $33 billion package, Joe, is more than double President Biden's initial request to Congress for assistance for the Ukrainians, which was about $13.5 billion. So this means that the U.S. would now be spending about as much per year trying to help the Ukrainians as we did in our own war in Afghanistan. And if you break down the numbers here, it's about $20 billion, $20.5 billion, the largest amount of this package going to military and security assistance for the Ukrainians. But there's also about $8 billion in there for economic assistance to try to help prop up Ukraine's government as it is struggling to keep basic functions going with all of these hits on its infrastructure and other challenge. There's also some humanitarian assistance included in this package, and this would really allow the administration to not have to go back to Congress every single month for more money. They are looking at a 5-month package, which essentially creates a bank account from which the Biden administration can draw down month after month as they need to provide bit by bit more security assistance to the Ukrainians. And you asked about the prospects in Congress. I think this aid package in and of itself for Ukraine Ukraine will be pretty applauded and have a lot of bipartisan support. But the real question, Joe, is whether lawmakers are going to try to either tie this in with COVID funding or if Republicans will seek a fight over the unrelated Title 42 issue. As you know well, sometimes things that seem like they should be straightforward aren't always so when they come to the U.S. Congress.
Some of these issues that we don't think have anything to do with what we're talking about suddenly come into play. Raf, I want to ask you about one of the topics of discussion between the UN chief and President Zelensky, and that's the situation in Mariupol and that blockaded steel plant. So this morning, the presidential office said an operation to evacuate civilians from that facility is being planned for today. What more can you tell us about that?
Yeah, Joe, a lot of confusion now about what is happening in Mariupol. Earlier this morning, President Zelensky's office putting out that statement saying they were hoping to carry out an evacuation today. There was nothing official from the UN, but we know that a UN team did move down to Zaporizhzhia yesterday to be in place in case a window of opportunity did come up for that evacuation to go ahead. In the hours since, though, we've seen no movement. We've actually been speaking to a Marine who is inside that steel plant. He says that Russian shelling has been continuing all day. He says that there has been talk of evacuations every day for the last 4 days, but nothing has materialized. So a lot of rumors circulating in the tunnels underneath that steel plant, some glimmers of hope that people are daring to cling to. But right now, there is no sign of an evacuation going ahead. It is 2 p.m. here in Ukraine. And of course, the Russians have a say in this. There is nothing official from the Russian government right now that suggests that an evacuation is planned, that they are planning to pull their forces back to allow that to go ahead. Zelensky's office referring only to an evacuation of civilians, so women and children. Not clear what would happen to those hundreds of wounded Ukrainian soldiers who are down in the plant also. The commander of one of the Ukrainian Marine units says he has 600 men wounded. They will die down there if they don't get the medical attention they need. Jeff?
The world watching what's happening there. Raf and Josh, thank you both. For more, let's bring in Lester Munson. He's a senior fellow at the National Security Institute and a principal in the international practice at BGR Group. Good to have you with us. Let's start with that new attack on Kyiv. I mean, do you think this was just a message to the rest of the world, or is it a sign of the war becoming perhaps a larger conflict again across Ukraine?
Well, Joe, I think it's a little bit of both, right? Vladimir Putin wants to send the message that everything is at stake with his invasion of Ukraine. He does not view it as an invasion. He views this as a special military operation, almost within the confines of Russia. The rest of the world disagrees. He is chomping at the bit, and he's in a bit of a corner because so far his military plans have not gone well. He's had to change his strategy. He's had terrible losses in the field. So he's striking out wherever he can. This missile strike near the UN Secretary General is a real insult to the world's view of what is happening.
I want to ask you about that $33 billion military aid package President Biden is now asking Congress for. Let's put that in perspective. That is more than the military budgets of most countries. So that being said, is that even enough, or is it possible the U.S. is going to need to consider more money again down the road as this continues to go on?
Yeah, this is a significant package. Frankly, it's more than I thought they were going to ask for. But I think everyone needs to realize this may be the first of several large aid packages related to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. President Zelensky told the world that he needs about $5 billion a month just to keep his government operating. That means paying his fighters, his doctors, his nurses, the people who are actually prosecuting this defense of Ukraine. So in addition to the military assistance, that economic assistance is hugely significant. This is a real sustainment for the entire nation of Ukraine. Hopefully the rest of the world, other donor nations, Europe, Japan, other countries can step up and do some more as well.
I also want to ask you about something that former U.S. Ambassador to Russia, Michael McFaul, tweeted. He said, Putin has lost his war in Ukraine. He may still win some battles, but he has already lost the war. Do you agree?
I think there's a lot of truth in that, but we still have a long way to go. Vladimir Putin has shown he's probably willing to do anything. He's made some rather extreme threats about the invasion of Ukraine. He's implied the use of nuclear weapons and other weapons of mass destruction. So while I would like to agree with that statement, I think it's really too soon to tell.
Lester Munson, thanks so much for your analysis this morning. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Turning now to the coronavirus and the new push to greenlight a vaccine for the last group of Americans waiting for their jab, our youngest children. Moderna has filed for emergency use authorization from the FDA for its vaccine for kids as young as 6 months old. Now, the company says the immune response for this youngest group was similar to the response for adults between the ages of 18 and 25. Let's bring in NBC News medical contributor Dr. Kavita Patel for more on this. Dr. Patel, good to have you with us. So Moderna has now filed this request. Now the FDA has to decide whether to authorize it. We've been through this process before, but it's been going slower for this youngest group of kids. So how long could the process take, and what will be the impact then if it's approved?
Yeah, Joe, much slower than any of us wanted. So here's just break down the date. Yesterday, Moderna initiated that submission. They still need to submit complete data in order to have kind of a full application for the FDA to review. They hope to do that by May 9th. FDA then has hundreds to possibly even thousands of pages of data and information to review. Turning that around, they've done it quickly. It can take 2 to 3 weeks if they're really committed to it. They call the advisory committee together, and then the CDC has to then call their advisory committee together. You could optimistically see jabs in arms by Memorial Day. That would be great. But people are saying more realistically it's June, just because of all that information that they have to process.
Just in time, though, for the summer for so many families, I should say. All right, I want to shift gears and turn to the issue of mask mandates and to some news out of San Francisco. The city's transit system there reinstating mask mandates because COVID cases are rising throughout the area there. Is this a good example of how local officials can be proactive in slowing the spread of COVID before a situation does get out of hand?
Yeah, Joe, I think that's a good example. I'm in the D.C. area where Uber and Lyft actually put mask mandates back in for drivers, along with others, some transit areas in limited parts of the state. So I do feel like this is a very typical trend that you're going to see. I think the question, though, is so which amount of cases necessitates this and which amount of cases brings it off? And I think that's where people are confused. And cities don't necessarily have the most up-to-date data. Not all cities are collecting data as often. So a lot of this depends on just how frequent and how refreshed your data is in your city, or county, or state.
We were told to keep those masks in drawers and keep them handy, so I guess that's playing out here. Dr. Patel, I also want to ask, we've seen cases creep up across the U.S. in recent weeks, but still hospitalizations and deaths have stayed at these lower levels. Do you think overall the country is in a pretty good place right now as we head into the summer months?
Yeah, it's in a better place. And I don't want people to mistake the word better for we're out of any danger, but it's absolutely worth celebrating that we are in a better place, in part due to vaccine-induced immunity and maybe some infection-induced immunity from the recent Omicron surge, since about 60% of adult Americans, 75% of children have demonstrated some sort of infection. But that only lasts so long, Joe, and we're always going to have to keep an eye for whatever might come next. So good shape, better shape now. Want to stay that way so that we can deal with the summer and the fall and the winter.
That would be nice. All right, Dr. Kavita Patel, as always, thanks so much. Have a good weekend.
Thank you.
So as COVID cases continue to weigh on the U.S. economy, President Biden is under growing pressure from progressives and young voters to cancel some, if not all, of the nation's federal student loan debt. We're talking about nearly $1.7 trillion of debt. Well, he has not made a decision on that just yet. Yesterday, the president did offer some insight into his plans.
I am considering dealing with some debt reduction. I am not considering $50,000 debt reduction, but I'm in the process of taking a hard look at whether or not there will be additional debt forgiveness.
Joining us now for more on this is Politico education reporter Michael Stratford. Michael, good to have you with us. So top Republicans in Congress have right off the bat signaled they're going to block any blanket debt forgiveness. So the White House is going to have to go at it alone here. What are the options the president has to cancel debt that's impacting more than 43 million Americans?
Good morning, Joe. That's exactly right. There is no legislative path for progressives getting this done in Congress. And that's why it's such a big deal that President Biden publicly confirmed yesterday that executive action to cancel some amount of student loan debt is something he's seriously considering. It's on the table and something he wants to make a decision on in the next few weeks. Progressives have been talking for some time now about having the Biden administration through the education department, because the federal government owns most of the outstanding student loan debt, to have them write off some amount of debt. And that's something that progressives argue the Education Department already has the power to do under existing law without needing to go to Congress. So the president has said he's looking at some amount of money. We know it's not going to be the $50,000 figure that progressives have been throwing around. In the past, the president has endorsed the idea of something closer to $10,000 per borrower. So that's probably what's more closely on the table right now.
So President Biden campaigned on wiping out up to $10,000 in federal loans per borrower. Now, the average federal student loan debt balance is actually more than $37,000, so not quite $10,000. But talk about the economic impact that eliminating at least some of that debt could have on the nation's student debt crisis.
Yeah, so we know that even if the president goes with the $10,000 figure, a lot of borrowers have less than $10,000, so that will wipe out completely the student debt burden for millions of federal student loan borrowers. And a lot of those borrowers are borrowers who maybe completed some college and then for whatever reason had to leave. So they sort of have kind of the worst of both worlds, and having some amount of debt but not having any degree to go get a job that earns more money. So it will, of course, be a significant event for those borrowers who get debt relief. And some progressives also were talking about this as some type of economic stimulus. We heard a lot about this during some of the negotiations over the COVID legislation. You'll recall Democrats tried to do this in 2020 through COVID legislation, but were unable to do so. They were blocked by Republicans in that effort. So it would be a significant economic tool to bring down the amount of outstanding student debt. And it's a lever that the White House is looking at using seriously.
All right, Michael, thanks so much for joining us this morning. We appreciate it. Time to get a check on your morning news now. Weather Michelle Grossman is with us again in person. Good to see you, Michelle. Happy Friday.
Happy Friday. Good to see you. We have a few hiccups for this weekend. First, we're going to start out with a small hiccup. We're looking at some cold weather. 22 million impacted this morning by a freeze warning. You can see that in the hot pink here from Cleveland to Pittsburgh, Harrisburg, including Trenton and Vineland, New Jersey. Now, as we go throughout time here, we're going to start to warm up. So by Monday and Tuesday, feeling a little bit more like spring. Still below normal today, not quite as chilly as we have been. We're looking at Buffalo today, 55. That's 7 degrees below what is typical for this time of year. Boston, 53. That's 8 degrees below what is typical for this time of year. Tomorrow, sort of the same story. You have all the kids' games to go to. You need to layer up in some spots. Temperatures in the 50s and 60s. But notice that yellow there. That's the warmer air, and that's going to be moving towards the east as we head towards Monday and Tuesday. So temperatures in the 80s in Memphis. Now, as we go throughout Monday and Tuesday, there are the 80s in Richmond, 82 degrees by Tuesday, 75 in Philadelphia. So finally, we get that spring fling. Now, we are also watching the chance for some severe weather this afternoon and tonight. We're going to watch this really closely. 9 million people at risk. Where you see that orange, that's your enhanced risk. And what that really tells you is severe weather is likely. Concordia, Wichita, you're under the gun for that. We're looking at hail up to 3 inches, and that means softball-size hail, maybe even larger than that. That can cause a lot of damage. A few strong tornadoes, EF2 or greater, and also some winds gusting up to 60 miles per hour. The yellow, that is your slight risk. That's really telling you that severe weather is possible there. Saturday, still looking at the threat for severe weather. 17 million people at risk, winds gusting up to 60 miles per hour. Hail, but smaller than today, and a few tornadoes are possible. So the threat isn't quite as great on Saturday, but it's still there from Chicago down to Evansville, also Paducah. Now, this is the setup here. We have an area of low pressure. We've been talking about it the past couple of days. It's sort of parked over the plains, so moving very, very slowly, and it's bringing this warm air into place, but it's also bringing a lot of moisture and also bringing the chance for severe weather. So heavy rain to the north in the plains. You can see the yellows and reds in North Dakota, South Dakota. We could see some flooding there, and a severe risk from Nebraska, Kansas, and also Oklahoma. Watch how slowly it moves. So by Saturday, we're looking at that rain continuing in Minnesota, and then that threat, the severe threat, moves off to the east. So a lot of people dealing with that tonight and tomorrow, which is not super ideal on the weekend.
Not great, but I like the idea of a spring fling. I'm looking forward.
Yes, we need that.
We need a spring fling.
Yeah,
all right,
I agree.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
We'll see you next hour.
Okay.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.